We're going to be hearing from Steve Bade about the ToolBox project.
We are a purpose-built freestanding building, which makes us perhaps a little unusual in the tool library land. We started at the beginning. I'm not a founder. I'm overlapped with the founder, second generation. Fall of 2013, Beth and Anya got the idea and got started on the 10,000 calls you make to get space. By the summer of 2014, we'd found a site, i.e. a location. And I want to talk a little bit about the location within the city. So we're given a timeline context, we're given a spatial context, 380,000 people in the metro area. We aim to serve all of those. Beth and Anya focused on the Friendly neighborhood and the Bethel neighborhood up north. Friendly's very active. Bethel is an underserved neighborhood. I think they probably did make a few thousand calls outside those ranges, but the tens and tens of thousands of calls, do you have space? Can you support us? We're focused on these two neighborhoods. So Friendly neighborhood itself is pretty dense. It qualifies as suburban on the census tract data, but a little on the denser side. So that's historical timeline, that's context in the city where we're at. The first phases for those first 3-ish years were just about contacting people and making friends and all of that. And I think the important part about what we did, what they did back then, was actually, and there's some of the friends that we made. Don't take notes, we'll get to them later. They started lending tools as soon as Pastor Mike at Friendly Street Church said, yeah, we can work something out. His idea originally was a pad that existed on the site, but the existence of a power line was going to interfere with popping up a shipping container or even building underneath it. So even while we were continuing to talk about how to do, what to do, where to do, Beth and Anya were at the church parking lot on Saturdays, every Saturday, graduated from the pickup truck and the card table to a Sprinter van and a card table, borrowing the Sprinter van. We did not buy it. And then transitioned over to looking at the space on site that was available. Now, the church gives this plot, clearly fairly not used, for one of these $1 a year in perpetuity leases. The energy around the build was incredible. That's when all those friends that we'd talked to about, we want to do this thing, say institutional partners like Lane County Waste Management and their waste reduction programs, or the city of Eugene, that's when they're, yeah, we're interested, we'll help you. That's when it got real. Okay, we're getting ready to build. Can you come through with that money that you described? And it actually happened. And we had a lot of good friends who were willing to donate labor or services or materials, some of them commercial operations like lumber yards, some of them trades operations like the concrete people, some of them construction people. But there were just neighbor volunteers on site every day of the 60 or so days worth of the build. And I think an interesting aspect of building it was that it created a community as much as talking about it created it, more than being in the church parking lot every Saturday was creating a community. All of that was effective. Everybody would come up and say, what's going on? We had early board members that were neighbors. We had a lot of member borrowers that just lived in the neighborhood and walked past. This is where we're at today. It's a 440 square foot shed with about 100 square feet worth of covered patio there. Just this spring, we got a 110-foot auxiliary shed, a tough shed product. It was less expensive than I thought it would be, and they're pretty well built. So we're very pleased with that. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had 150 square feet or so of conditioned office space in the basement of the church. That's good for our cider presses off season. They like being in a little more temperate weather. That comes to us below market rate rent. One of our board members is a realtor, so some of us wished it could be cheaper, but his sense of the world was, this is reasonable, let's go for it. So after the original exciting community building stages of building this building, I'd say the energy dropped off a little bit. We still had a lot of work to do. We had to do a rain shed kind of garden for city code requirements. And of course, we had to build out the interior. And we found out early on that the patio got pretty dang hot on a Saturday morning. It faces east and the sun comes up and you start cooking. So we got the pergola. And ongoingly, we're adding electrical outlets even right now. So it's just like moving into your starter home or any kind of, accept what's acceptable and make it work for you. So here's a picture of the rain garden, and you see the sprinter in the background. We're still out there lending tools. We haven't fully moved into this shed yet. Um, Here's the pergola, and again, this was volunteer built. The woman in the ball cap and the blue T-shirt is a architect and contractor. She gave us the design and the build for free. She and Anya were friends in their graduate programs, and I think Anya said, we can pay you, and she said, I'll just do it for free. She was getting started on her firm and her career, and she was willing to do, a real life portfolio for us. Interestingly, about the pergola and about that weird thing in the high middle, that's supposed to be a pole handled tool holder. It didn't work so great. Volunteers designed and built that and gave it to us, and we only finally got rid of it a couple of years ago. The pergola, the pitch on the roof could be a lot steeper. It does not shed rain well, and it sticks. It's built away from the shed itself, so there's rain coming down all the way around it. So interesting gotcha with free anything, right? What kind of stuff does it come with? And I don't mean to look at the teeth on that gift horse, but whoops, we're living with it. So this is what we look like pretty much now, very standard, not imagining spending a ton of time talking about this because I think it looks like a lot of y'all's ideas and a lot of y'all's existing tool libraries. The middle shot in there is the new version of dealing with pole handle tools after we got rid of that weird cart. So they're just hanging from those cleats in the wall, and there's a top pretty long one, and we've got bungees around some of the tools, and then the bays in the framing are storage for some of the other stuff. And those all have locations. You see the drawer numbers, 19, 20, 21, etc. Bay H1, Bay J, Bay K, Bay L, stuff like that. I talked about relationships at the beginning and that 3-ish year process before we started actually building. That's when you get those connections. That's when you find out who's willing and supportive. And that's when you call a church and they don't even understand what you're asking. What do you mean? Do we have any space? You saw it, it's a big building, it's in the neighborhood. They don't get it, or it's not part of their mission. We currently are thinking about maybe setting up another location somewhere and have had a conversation with a church, took a tour. Didn't have quite the right space for us. The price wasn't going to be acceptable. We've also talked about co-locating with a Habitat for Humanity restore here. They're imagining moving within a few years, and we've got a great relationship with them that started that relationship thing when Beth and Anya first started asking around. Some of those conversations were just about money, and the city promised money, and the county promised money, and we had access to that money, the liquidity of the money. We had access to that money based on the relationships, based on the trust that had built, and the commitment that we had shown, actually being there every Saturday, lending tools, developing a community around this thing. Those friendships based on relationships in the lower right hand quarter are the people in the organizations that are still supporting us. Some folks move away from town, some folks, individual people, their financial situation changes or they're done with that project. The kind of energy around a work party is what we exploited for 3-4 months when we were building the building. And I think many of us here understand that that's a different kind of energy than showing up every Tuesday at 5, Thursday at 5, and Saturday morning at 9 to actually operate the tool lending library. Of course, some of what you're talking about with people is their capabilities and what they can do. They have a tool, they've got that excavator, they've got access to the concrete truck, etc. We need them actually to commit. We needed worker hours, and we needed all of the labor kinds of jobs that go with any kind of building project, and we were able to provide that pretty much for free rather than having the the tradespeople's crews. So the big part of all of that is the magic in it, in my mind. 2 + 2 can equal 5 when the synergy of having a conversation with the city turns into they're still talking to us and, offered us money. Here's X amount of money, what do you want to use it for? Expansion, capacity building, that kind of stuff. So I think that's my last slide, and I'm open to questions.
Can you actually speak to a little bit more about some of those community groups? You mentioned Habitat for Humanity, you mentioned the city. Were there specific departments, and do you know how those conversations were started?
The State Department of Environment Quality, we found out about that they existed. Lane County Waste Management is very active in garbage hauling and recycling. We own our own landfill here. It's publicly owned rather than privately owned. So they were an important early one. They offer master recycling classes out of Lane County Waste Management. Bring is a local nonprofit originally called Begin Recycling in Neighborhood Groups, just about getting cans and glass back in the early 1970s. They're basically a building materials salvage yard at this point. A woman that was working there on the floor is actually now the head of the City of Eugene Waste Reduction and Green Building, a department within the city. So we're that kind of city, where people are interested and willing to try new things. Who else? And of course, Pastor Mike in the church. I mean, that's a real commitment, letting us build on their land, letting us stay on their land. And at this point, it's just a fantastic partnership. We help with security with their building. We don't regularly offer work parties to mow their lawn or anything like that. The congregation takes care of stuff like that, but they've got a key and they can come in and use our tools. Lots of construction companies came through because it was a thing. Anya's very persuasive. She shows up and persuades people and they follow through when it's a real thing, when we can show data on my turn checkouts without even having a building.
So can you speak a little bit more to that about how you attracted those people? Like, was there specific media work that you were doing? Were you cold calling those companies together? Like, what did
I,
that look like?
I think there was a lot of cold calling. We had tradespeople involved in the volunteer community around us, and they called, their friends or their boss or whatever. There's a really sweet story. I'd say that what we're looking at there was solicited, and we came to some terms. Somebody gave it to us for free, or we bought it on the cheap, or we just paid full price. 10% of it was unsolicited, like the pergola design and build. A guy was driving past and came up in the parking lot. Beth and Anya are on site. What's going on here? The building's being built. He was the local representative for the Solatube sun skylight company, and he gave us the skylights and installed them and let us know when he wanted to get into the building, in terms of the construction of our steel roof and all of that. I think the black and white answer, Tom, is a lot of cold calls, a lot of chutzpah to make that call, but a lot of context from which we're making this call. There's more of us than just me. In fact, there's more of us than just Beth and Anya. There's a whole bunch of people, and we're already doing the thing that we want to do, and we're doing it without a building. Will you help us build a building at this stage? They did not imagine designing a building. Just give us a space was the first ask. And I don't know what their conditions were. Our conditions at this point, if we're thinking about creating an extra location, a new tool lending library, it's got to be in the right neighborhood, underserved, and it's got to be basically free, and it's got to be conditioned space with access to a washroom. Somebody takes care of the trash hauling and stuff like that. I don't think that's crazy. I think it'll be a little bit like winning the lottery if we pull that off. But that's the discussion we're having with Habitat for Humanity Restore. The guy that runs the Restore said, yeah, we could look at numbers and I could find a way to sell it to my higher ups that it's marketing for the Restore. Does that help?
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, there's context. There's other restores that already have tool libraries built into them, right? So that's not a fresh thing. And I'll say that was the case when we were starting the Asheville tool library as well. And we went and had multiple meetings with the restore, and they decided that in their current space they just didn't have room for us. Like
Right.
all their space was being utilized, so there wasn't that opportunity to be able to build something from the ground up, or move into another space, with that being part of the intention of bringing a partner along like that.
Right, but they're your friends now. We
Yep.
got a board member from the Habitat organization and from the city, and a woman that was consulting for the city, so not a full-on employee. But our early board, the first four people included.
Yep. And I was going to make sure we get to a couple more questions before we pass it on. And again, there's going to be time for more questions at the end when we wrap up. So if we don't get to your specific question right now, please understand that we'll pull back to it again. I think this was a pretty important question that just got asked was, do you find that having a tool library in a church or a religious space prevents people from utilizing the tools? Like, are there people that don't feel comfortable?
I doubt it. There's a possibility. This is a pretty mellow church to begin with. We're at the back corner of their parking lot, so we almost feel like our own thing. Oh, there's this parking lot, and there's two things on it: a church at the south end and a little shed at the north end. Yeah, I get that, but and I haven't heard anybody say, "Well, I'm not coming to you because you're associated with those weirdos." I don't think that's a big deal here, and we wouldn't have partnered with a less welcoming, less community-minded. It wouldn't have come together. This
Uh,
is the church that gives away free root beer floats at the neighborhood picnic every July. So they're pretty outgoing.
And then one last question, and before the shed was built and you had the tools in the van, how did you store the van or tools outside of the van? And when they were on the road or not in use, basically when they weren't on the
Ah,
road.
that's a great
Um,
question.
yeah.
We were borrowing the sprinter, so I'm pretty sure they were getting taken out of the van and dropped in the garage, and the contractor's tools were getting loaded back in. Some of the magic is, Beth was married to a contractor, and he, gave her services at cost. But you look around, I look around at what's the magic that we have now,
Mhm.
who's got magic and how can we use it? We're off grid. We depend on that photovoltaic solar system. Our guy, Solar Dave, takes care of it for us for free. He also does the solar systems for community supported shelters, one of these little micro hut, tiny homeless support systems. There's folks that have skills and want to share. And back to the idea of the van, it's daunting, but if it's part of the process, so it's better than the pickup truck and the weird little trailer. And it's not as good as having a building, but we're getting there to having the building. I can imagine an operation fading if you really were dependent on something that was as difficult as that.